A new local task force joins a statewide effort to make criminal prosecutions of animal cruelty cases more successful. Here to discuss why and how the initiative came to be is Dr. Adam Stern, a veterinary forensic pathologist at the University of Florida. Good morning, Dr. Stern.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. We're also joined by Bryan Shorstein, Executive Director of the 7th Circuit State Attorney's Office, who oversees the circuit's animal cruelty cases. Good morning, Bryan. So, Dr. Stern, let's start with why is there a need for a task force in the first place?
So the need for the task force, there's actually multiple reasons. The first one is simply education to allow us to help investigators, prosecutors learn how to use forensic science to help their cases. So bringing evidence to court, proving things happen, not just thinking it happened, but having science say this is what happened. That's the first thing. The next thing is getting all of the different players in the different regions together. We have similar problems that we deal with. And so realizing that everybody is dealing with the same info, we can have them work together to improve what they're doing.
And this local Northeast Florida task force is just the latest, but you have helped spearhead similar task forces around the state. This is one of now several.
Yes, this is actually the third of the series that I'm building. I have one more to go, but we have the Central Florida Animal Cruelty Task Force. We have the Northwest, so covering the Panhandle, and then we have the North, which is covering your region, Alachua County, Volusia County, and so on.
And you are, as I said in the intro there, you're a veterinary forensic pathologist. That is a very specific kind of work that you do. You've described yourself as sort of a medical examiner, but for animals.
That's correct. Basically, we're doing the same exact thing. We're doing autopsies, this time on animals rather than on humans. And so same science, same techniques, different patient.
Okay. Bryan, you have handled animal cruelty prosecutions for the 7th Circuit for many, many years now. Talk to us, first of all, just about the particular challenges of bringing these kinds of cases.
Well, let's first say, before you had what someone like Adam or experts that do what he does, in its most simple state, a lot of times you have a case and an animal died, and the first question you're going to ask is, well, did you get a necropsy done? And a lot of times that wasn't happening. It's just they didn't know. They take the animal, they dispose of the animal. Those don't make those cases fatal necessarily, but now with Adam and his team, all of our prosecutors know, and the investigators and law enforcement know, that if we can quickly get the animal to Adam or whoever it is, a vet, sometimes it's a local vet, just like he said in a human case, you can find things out and answer questions that you couldn't answer without it, just because of forensics, or they can see what happened to the animal. We can all guess, but as you know, Ann, in court, you need a lot more than that, and that helps immensely in these cases.
And not all of these cases are cases involving an animal that's deceased. Some of them involve animals that are still alive and perhaps show some signs of abuse or neglect. But these are victims that can't speak. And so it as a prosecutor, I imagine you're looking much more at the kinds of evidence available to you that don't involve witness testimony.
Sure. As you said, they can't speak. And so you're part of this group. We call it task force. I mean, it's a lot of really communication force. Everybody's helping everyone, because if somebody sees something, they go out to a scene, and let's say the animal's not dead. Maybe there are things that they haven't seen, and they could ask anyone in the group, okay, what do I do here? Is the animal's level of suffering, because in the cruelty to animals statutes, there's a misdemeanor statute, there's a felony statute. It's not the absolute clearest of two statutes. Sometimes you're right on that line of what's a misdemeanor, what's a felony. And the only way you're going to get to any sort of successful prosecution is the more information you have as to what's going on with the animal or what kind of suffering is going on. Just like anything, the more you know, the more it helps the case. And to have investigators that are trained up, that just know their cases and know what they're supposed to do at the scenes, certainly are going to make the prosecution of these cases more viable.
It's sort of a niche area, right? I mean, you've done this prosecution for a long time. You must be one of the experts in prosecuting in the state at this point.
We've done them. I remember when Mr. Larissa and I, my boss, started many, many years ago. You would do dog fighting and whatever it was we were prosecuting. It is really, really advanced compared to what it was at that point. The tools we have compared to the tools we had back then are night and day.
But these are not, I mean, I know that at the Fourth Circuit here in the Duval Clay Nassau area, Cy Zamarodian is the designated animal cruelty prosecutor, has been for a long time.
Right.
And so there must be that body of knowledge that you have as a prosecutor that isn't really that easily transferable maybe to your colleagues.
It's not. And like you said, Cyrus is great. Cyrus and I talk all the time because same thing. They do a good job with the animal prosecution here. And we're all lucky. You have circuits that Dr. Stern has seen that aren't as great. Maybe some of the rural ones that just aren't caught up yet, which is really what Adam's trying to do. But for us, like in the seventh with Mr. Larissa and Miss Nelson, who has Cyrus, and everybody's talking. Like I say, Cyrus and I talk all the time. And yes, it is harder. You go put an individual young prosecutor on the case, they're not going to know what we're going to know, who's been doing it for 20 years. And so you're usually going to have in these offices, there's someone in the Fifth and Ninth Circuit that are sort of like myself and Cyrus that oversee that. And therefore, we're communicating with each other, the younger prosecutors, the experts like Dr. Stern, the investigators, like a lot of our offices will have specific investigators that are also on for the sheriff's office agencies or the police departments that are also more familiar with it. So, yeah.
Yeah. If you're just joining us, we're talking about a new task force created to help crack down on animal cruelty cases in Northeast Florida. You can join the conversation by giving us a call at 904-549-2937. You can also email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org, or you can reach out on social media. So, Dr. Stern, he talked a little bit about how sometimes different parts of the area, different regions can have different challenges. And one of the main things that you're aiming to do with these task forces is improve communication, improve access to resources. But what are some of the disparities that you see circuit to circuit or even county to county?
So there's many. One simply is access to finances for some of these cases. Investigations cost money. And unfortunately, when it comes to animals, some agencies, although they are charged with doing the investigations, they don't have the funds necessary to actually pay for that. And so at the University of Florida, one of the things that we do is we try to help that. We try to cut costs for them doing the same work, but supplementing what they can afford with funding that we can provide. So giving them essentially grant funding so that we can do the investigations for them, get them the information they need.
What are some of the costs associated with bringing a criminal prosecution? Are you talking just about like the lab work itself, or are you talking about some asset that would have to be brought to court?
So when I talk about the investigations, it's getting the animal evidence examined. So costs for autopsies. If it's a case where a dog has been potentially shot or a cat has been shot, getting radiographs or a CT scan so we can visualize the projectile, because that's valuable evidence that we have to recover. So finding it, knowing where it is, and then doing the autopsy. We have poisoning cases or suspect poisoning cases. Getting the toxicology done, not free. And so we have to get funding for them to do all of that. Then plus paying for time and travel if I need to go and testify, say in South Florida or on the tip of the Panhandle, wherever it might be.
Practically speaking, when you see those disparities, what does that mean in terms of, justice in these cases?
So that's where this task force and the work that I do comes into play. Is we're trying to get rid of those disparities, and you can see the differences. When I came to Florida in 2018, Florida was very new to me. I had to learn all the players, but once I started to see what the different counties had and did not have, looking back today, I can see I've made a real huge change in some of these counties that didn't have access at all. And now I'm getting subpoena after subpoena for those cases. So there's definitely been a lot of movement forward.
I was very surprised to learn that you are a fairly singular position in this state. Bryan noted that sometimes autopsies are done or evaluations are done by veterinarians, but you really are the only veterinary forensic pathologist in this position in the state.
Yes. It's actually a very unique position. I actually just hired someone. So she's going to be starting a little bit later this year, which I'm very excited. We are growing tremendously. But our field is very specialized, very new, and there's just not the number of professionals out there yet. We're growing it, but in the state, I'm the only one.
You're it. We've got a call from Mark on the west side. Good morning, Mark. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is truly disconcerting, I think. Apparently this animal cruelty stuff happens all the time and in greater numbers than I thought. I mean, you rarely hear about it on the news, but if you've got this organized task force and bureaucracy and you're hiring people, apparently animal cruelty numbers are skyrocketing or way up there, I guess.
Well, that's a good question, Mark. I mean, Bryan, what is the circumstance with animal cruelty cases?
So let me answer that, because I think what happens is people hear the word task force and they think, okay, are we trying to correct something? So the caller makes a very good point. The numbers really aren't that high. I defer to Adam in some sense, but I mean, if I look at the numbers of cases we have in our circuit and compare them to any period in time, it isn't that there's a lot of cases. I think in a lot of areas it's better than it used to be, because these cases are treated a lot more seriously. I sort of liken it to one of the cases that everybody knows about. Probably the most famous is the Michael Vick case. That was horrible. But at the end of the day, what it did for animal prosecution, it really raised the awareness that the sentences are harsher. The laws have been tougher nationwide. The judges are tougher.
I mean, there may be some people who aren't familiar with the Michael Vick case, but that was a famous football player who had accused of ultimately convicted of dog fight.
Right, drowning dogs. It was horrible, but really drew attention to it. Unfortunately, a lot of this stuff in any type of crime, you take something really bad to happen to change things. So no, the need for the task force isn't because something is wrong. It's just to make something that's already existing better. And with Adam there, we know that if we have a case, and while the vets are great in our circuit, I mean, the veterinarians are great. When we can tell the other side that our expert is Adam, Dr. Stern, and University of Florida, they know that probably we have the best working on our cases. And it's a great call and a great question, but no, this isn't created because something was wrong.
There are some cases in your career that have been particularly high profile. There have been some cases, that almost rise to the level of a murder case in terms of generating public attention, generating media attention. Are there some cases that have been particularly impactful for you as a prosecutor?
Yeah, the Ponce case in Daytona was the name of a dog where a guy, the defendant, had basically thrown the dog and beat him to death and thought nothing was going to happen. And at the end of the day, the laws changed. There's now Ponce's law because of that death of that dog through the work of the Port Orange police, Debbie Dorino, an activist in Daytona that is like no other, maybe the top activist in the state, Tom Leake, who just won a Senate race, is always involved in animal stuff, changed the law and made it much easier for prosecutors to put people like this in jail. It increased with the level on the score sheets. What that means in English is that now these people can go to jail. We can take away their animals for longer, for life actually, when they do stuff like this. So Ponce is probably the biggest one, because anytime you have something like that and then the law is named after that case, that's usually an indication. Adam and I were talking about one on the way in here, where a guy had taken, it was a domestic violence origination. He had taken his girlfriend's dog and brought the girlfriend's 16-year-old kid out to the woods and said, I'm going to shoot one and you're going to shoot the other, to the 16-year-old kid. The poor kid was crying. The guy shoots both of them, kills both of the dogs. So you've had a domestic violence or cruelty to animals. And because of the fact we got that necropsy done quickly, that guy is now in prison. It wouldn't have been as easy in the past because combined Ponce's law, which allows us to put him in jail, the work that was done on the necropsy end. And so, there's clearly advancements, and what happens with these more high-profile cases sometimes bring awareness. It's the good and bad.
What do we know about the intersection between animal cruelty and other kinds of crimes? I mean, you mentioned, an animal being used in a specific domestic violence circumstance, but What do we know about tendencies towards animal cruelty, how that parlays into other kinds of criminal activity?
So I'll defer to Adam. There's something we all know in any animal training called the link. And
Yep. And the link is basically the relationship between animal abuse and all other kinds of interpersonal violence. So elder abuse, child abuse, spousal abuse, domestic violence. We also see relationships with, unfortunately, school shootings. About 40% of school shooters have committed animal cruelty. So those numbers can go for pretty much every kind of crime. There's a huge relationship there. Rapists, for example, are another one that a lot of them
A
have.
big correlation in that
Mhm.
case.
Yeah.
hmm And so, is it your position, Brian, then that prosecuting these cases when they do arise is helping to avert any kind of other offense?
it does. I mean, when we talk about the link, it's one of the things is whether you're an investigator, whether you're in Adam's business or mine, you learn about that in all of your initial classes. And people think, okay, that, these stories we all hear that if you were a serial killer and you hurt animals to beginning, but like Dr. Stern said, it's a lot more than that. These people that are committing these crimes, it's a wider range of things that they're doing or that they're capable of or have done. It's just simple logic. If you're going to hurt an animal, probably something else is going on.
There are some other bills out there. I know there was a big reaction last year when that dog was leashed in a flood zone. Trooper, that got a lot of attention during the last hurricane season. And I don't know if that specifically led to any direct changes, but I know that there's always some bills pending. Do you have any personal priorities, things that you would like to see?
So there is always some, and there was legislation that arose out of Trooper's case that was enacted. But yeah, there always is, and it's getting better and it's getting more. The two that I can think of off the top of my head is we had mentioned the criminal score sheet. There is one in legislation this time, I believe Senator Leak just signed it and submitted it, where you increase the score sheet multiplier. Once again, in English, that means harsher penalties. And another one where Senator Leak and Debbie Dorino are trying to expand like a base, a registry, that if you commit crimes on animals, then at a state level, you may be on a registry. There's a little more to it than that, but that's the Reader's Digest version of two. We expect them both to be passed. But in this process, you never know until they're passed. But yes, there is legislation constantly on these cases.
Got a call from Steve in St. Augustine. Good morning, Steve. Go ahead.
Hello, Mr. Shorstein. I have a question for you. A couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, there was a case over in Palatka, Florida, where a postal worker was attacked by some vicious dogs. I believe she was actually killed by them. Whatever happened in that case?
That's a good question, Steve. Go ahead, Brian.
It's a very good question. So, and Dr. Stern and I were talking to this before we got on the air. That was terrible. And what happened here, Ann, is what happens when you don't have funding and when you don't have communication. This may be the model reason for this task force. What ended up happening is you had a guy that owned 4 pit bulls, and he didn't have the ability to fence them in properly. So he had called to try and turn them in, all 4 of them. They hadn't done anything at this point, but you could tell that they were dogs that were capable of something. When he called one agency locally, they had said, we'll take care of it. And another agency is like, I thought they were taking care of it. So this guy actually tried 3 or 4 separate times to turn these dogs in. That never happened. The agencies blamed each other, and they mauled a poker worker, like the caller said, and she died. Unfortunately, the guy there is no crime. He tried to turn them in. I think you would make a distinction if he didn't, but what the caller is talking about is the worst of the worst situations when there isn't communication, there isn't funding, but this was more communication. If everyone would have gotten on the same side, okay, we have to take these dogs in. This guy's trying to turn them in, and it never got done. And he had 60-something-year-old postal worker ends up dead because of it.
Pam Rock, I think her name was,
Yeah.
61. And so how is the task force in a position to help prevent things like that, Dr. Stern?
Yeah, so one part of the task force at the end, so we do, we have an agenda each time. And at the end, we have an open discussion where basically it's anybody who has any question, a case that's going on, or even just, hey, we had this case and this is what happened. We've learned a lesson from it. So lessons learned as well. So we always, in every meeting I run, I always open it up to everybody.
Can you think of an example where someone came up with a lesson learned from a case, a recent something that had, that was imparted to the group that would be helpful?
Yeah, there was one case, and we look at lessons learned. Everybody has their different jobs. I'm not an attorney. I'm a veterinarian, right? But this was from an attorney, and the attorney didn't win their case. They said, "Yeah, the case actually got tossed," and it was we didn't do an autopsy. We didn't get an animal necropsy, and talked about all the things that a veterinarian, myself, could have done to answer the questions that, quite honestly, he needed answers, because he didn't have everything just on the surface. There was a lot more going on. So little things like that can really help any of these participants.
And you've said your job is not to help the prosecution or to help the defense, but really to sort of help the judge and the jury.
Yeah, my duty is to the court. The court asks, basically the court's asking me, how do we interpret this medical evidence that you have? So I always say my answer is going to be the same for a prosecutor as a defense attorney. The dog has been shot. This is where it's been shot. This is how it died. The horse was poisoned. This was the poison. Well, it's really straightforward for me.
Yeah.
And then the jury, the judge, are going to be deciding guilt or innocence. And
I want to ask you about animal neglect, which we haven't really talked about too much. Obviously, that figures into prosecution sometimes. Often it seems that the animal neglect cases almost grow out of a sort of a good intention gone bad. Someone is very often in a business of trying to maybe rescue animals that had been left alone, and they take on a little more than they can handle it, or perhaps that's a misapprehension. Bryan, what is your thought about that?
No, you're accurate. And those are tough, because you then have a sort of a two-level analysis and when you're prosecuting them, because a lot of these people intend to help the animals. We've had ones where they really think they're helping the animals, but they're, because of age or because of whatever their situation is, then you have a crime where it would meet one of the statutes, either the misdemeanor or felony, and then you have to try and figure out, do we prosecute this person because were they trying to be cruel, or were they trying to help and it ended up because they can't feed 24 dogs or because they can't have the necessary medical care? Do you prosecute those people? Those are very, very difficult, because you do have people, you have to make those decisions as investigators and prosecutors as to whether people like that intended to hurt them. Because a lot of times they don't, and then you just see what you can do. A lot of times those cases end up with some sort of agreement where you take the animals, or it all depends on what they really intended to do. And you can't always get to the bottom of that. Once again, go back to the fact that the animals can't speak. So, but there is a lot of that. It's not always you see something that's horrible and the person meant to do it because they intended to. It's a lot of people are trying to help.
Right. Got a call from Tom at NAS Jax. Good morning, Tom. Go ahead.
Good morning. I have a question about the ASPCA. I thought that these kind of actions would fall under the auspices of the ASPCA. They're on TV raising funds all the time, and they make money for fundraisers, but I never see the ASPCA in action in Northeast Florida. Is there a reason for that absence or something?
Good question, Tom. I mean, where do the sort of private animal welfare groups figure into this?
so the private animal welfare groups, the national groups, oftentimes they're involved in those large-scale animal hoarding cases, the puppy mill cases, some of the dog fighting cases. That's typically where I see them. So they're working different states all the time. They're not always just in one location.
Yeah, it's different. If you have, like Adam said, on the wider scale cases, they'll offer help. But for individual prosecution cases and stuff like that, that's not really what they do, and you don't really need them. They're great the way that they rescue animals and help, and they've got those commercials that are, invaluable because I think it really gets to the people's heartstrings. But yeah, on our level, on the state level, they're available. I've times we've called the ASPCA and asked them for certain things, and they're always helpful. But you know, you don't use them or need them as much in the individual prosecution.
In the day-to-day, yeah.
Mm-mm.
So we're talking about bringing cases for prosecution. There are obviously lots of people out there who feel that they have seen instances of animal cruelty or neglect. What do you advise people to do if they feel like they've witnessed something or they're seeing something, whether it's an emaciated horse in a field or they know that their neighbor's, house is full of some kind of, cat or dog? What should people do?
Well, I always use the term "see something, say something." It's a term we've been using now for 2 decades, since 9/11. Been using that a lot, and the same is true here. You see an emaciated horse, you see an emaciated cow. Call your local authorities, call your local animal services. If you don't know who to call one of them and just say, "Hey, this is what I saw," and then they can either take your info down and pass it on to the appropriate agency, or say, "Hey, that's actually not our jurisdiction, but this is the group that you should call," and then they'll give you that info.
And Bryan, when it comes to reporting these cases, obviously, we're talking about the importance of documenting instances. Do you encourage people to do anything in the way of photographing, videotaping? Are there cautions that people should be aware of if they are thinking about doing that?
I mean, that's the world we live in. That nowadays there's always a phone to snap them. And to go back to what Adam said, on all of his classes, I've taken many. They see something, say something. We just had one where somebody saw a cat, and it looked like the cat was really in distress, and this family homed it. They took it to the vet. They called the vet, like you said, call somebody, whether it's the vet, whether it's animal control, whether it's the sheriff's office. And the vet examined them, and then they found the owner, and now we're in this dispute. Was the owner a bad owner that was hurting this cat, or did the cat get out and injured itself? And all of this, it'll be fine, but all of it is because somebody did something. Somebody took this cat to the vet, and we get a lot more. And a lot of what this group is to do is now we have a group for an investigator that may see something. Now they can call with these task forces a prosecutor who's ultimately going to be the one to make the decision as to whether these charges are filed. So yes, it's cliche, but it's the see something, say something, no matter who it is, whether it's a vet, whether it's animal control, whether it's a sheriff's office, anybody. It helps.
And I would guess there are too, you have to be careful that you're not trespassing if you're, trying to take a photograph or trying to take a video of something. I mean, there are laws that apply to people who are in good intent trying to report something, but they can't just kind of willy-nilly go onto someone's property or someone's farm.
Right. And it's no different than that would be like in human cases. If you can take a picture, you can do certain things, but it doesn't allow you to go step into somebody's house, as an individual and just go take the law into your hands or what you think. So it's more of a common sense approach. But I do think it's better. We see a lot of those. People take videos. Here's what we have. They turn them in. And that starts with the only evidence that you have. But it's better than if you had nothing, which, and like I said, in today's world, everyone's got a phone. Everyone's taking pictures and videos.
Yeah. And Dr. Stern, I know that this is a passion project of yours, creating these task forces around the state. Do you see conditions improving? Do you see the situation improving when it comes to animal welfare?
Yeah, I do. I look at the Central Florida Task Force, which I started along with 2 prosecutors back in 2022, and we have seen amazing differences from the first day where it was just a group of people in a room, and now our meetings will have 40 people every quarter. And it's not always the same people. We'll get new people coming in, which is great because then they learn something and they bring it back. But we see it over and over, and we have seen a lot of improvement in how these cases are handled, how they are prosecuted, or maybe they're not prosecuted because there was no crime. We can't forget that there's also things happen. There's natural disease. The animal had cancer. It wasn't the bad owner. Cancer happened naturally. So trying to bring that in as well to say we can exonerate people just as much as someone's going to get prosecuted.
Right.
And to that end, Adam, and what also with these activists and some of the people, because these are big media cases, that these animal politics and these type of cases get a lot of attention. We get emails and probably more in animal cases than anything else. I'm not even sure it's close. Sometimes something shows up on the TV and there's outrage in the community. And in reality, because of the work that they do, it isn't a crime. It isn't what necessarily is reported. So it's not like prosecutors and law enforcement's here just to go get everybody that they think did something wrong. Sometimes through the forensics and Adams people or a vet that does a good job, people get exonerated. You certainly don't want people to be in trouble for something they didn't do. And there's nothing worse than when they're on the news and media and all of this stuff, or what is perceived that they did and looks like they did, but because of all the work that we're now able to do and they're able to do, you're just trying to get the right result for whatever that case is, whether it's prosecution or exoneration.
Right. Well, Dr. Adam Stern, thanks so much for coming over from Gainesville this morning. We really appreciate it.
It was great to be here.
Yeah. And Bryan Shorstein, thanks so much for coming up from the Southern District.
Thanks for having us, Ann.
Yeah, it was terrific.
We loved it.